The twin moons of Kethera Prime cast pale silver light across the dense jungle below. The massive trees stretched hundreds of meters into the sky, their thick canopy blocking most of the moonlight from reaching the forest floor. In this darkness, shadows moved with purpose and deadly intent. Calveth crouched on a branch high above the ground, his bioluminescent eyes glowing softly in the dark. He was a Na'vi night hunter, one of the most feared warriors in the entire Galactic Coalition. His people had evolved on a world of eternal twilight, where the sun never fully rose above the horizon. Their eyes had developed to see in almost complete darkness, glowing with an inner light that helped them navigate their shadowed home world. Tonight, Calveth led a patrol of 6 hunters through the jungle. They were searching for the crashed vessel that had entered Kethera Prime's atmosphere 3 days ago. The Coalition had identified it as a human ship, and the High Council had sent the Na'vi to deal with the survivors. Humans were a new species to the galaxy. They had only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago, and most Coalition members considered them primitive and weak. Calveth had never encountered a human before, but he had heard the reports. They came from a world with a bright yellow sun, their eyes adapted for daylight. In the darkness of Kethera Prime's jungles, they would be completely blind. The hunt would be easy. Calveth raised his hand in a silent signal, and his patrol spread out through the trees. Their movements were completely silent, their bodies built for stealth and speed. Each hunter carried a traditional spear tipped with crystal that could pierce the strongest armor. They wore no clothing except for ceremonial bands around their arms and legs. Their blue skin provided natural camouflage in the darkness. Through the trees ahead, Calveth spotted the crash site. The human vessel had torn a long scar through the jungle, snapping massive trees like twigs before coming to rest against a rocky outcrop. Smoke still rose from its damaged hull, and emergency lights flickered weakly inside. Calveth observed the scene with his glowing eyes. He could see every detail clearly despite the darkness. The ship was small, perhaps designed to carry only a dozen passengers. Its hull was blackened and torn in several places. No movement was visible inside or around the wreckage. He clicked his tongue twice, a signal for his hunters to advance. They moved through the canopy like ghosts, surrounding the crash site from all directions. Calveth felt the familiar thrill of the hunt rising in his chest. His people had been warriors and hunters since the beginning of their history. They had conquered their entire homeworld before joining the Coalition, and their skills had only grown sharper since then. The first hunter reached the edge of the clearing. Calveth watched him drop silently from his branch and land on the jungle floor without making a sound. The hunter approached the ship cautiously, his spear ready in his hands. Nothing moved. The hunter reached the hull and pressed his ear against it. After a moment, he looked back toward the trees and shook his head. The ship was empty. Calveth frowned. The humans could not have gone far. They were creatures of the light, helpless in darkness. On a world like Kethera Prime, they should have stayed with their ship and waited for rescue. Moving into the jungle would be suicide for beings who could not see, unless they were already dead. Calveth considered this possibility. The crash had been violent. Perhaps no one had survived. But the High Council's sensors had detected life signs in this area just hours ago. Someone was alive in this jungle. He signaled for his hunters to spread out and search the surrounding area. They moved into the trees with practiced ease, their glowing eyes scanning every shadow and corner. Calveth remained at the crash site, studying the tracks in the soft earth. There were footprints leading away from the ship. Human footprints, based on their shape and size. Calveth counted at least 5 different sets of tracks heading in the same direction, toward the mountains in the east. The humans had fled into the jungle. Calveth smiled to himself. This would make the hunt more interesting. He raised his spear and began to follow the trail, his movements swift and silent through the darkness. The other hunters would catch up soon enough. The trail was easy to follow. The humans had stumbled and crashed through the undergrowth, breaking branches and leaving clear marks on the soft forest floor. They moved without any skill or grace, their progress loud and clumsy. Calveth could have tracked them with his eyes closed. As he moved deeper into the jungle, Calveth noticed something strange. The trail was becoming harder to follow. The broken branches and disturbed earth grew less frequent, the footprints less visible. It was as if the humans were learning to move more carefully. Impossible. No creature could adapt so quickly to total darkness. Calveth slowed his pace and listened. The jungle around him was silent. Too silent. The normal sounds of night creatures had disappeared completely. Something had frightened them into hiding. A branch snapped somewhere to his left. Calveth spun toward the sound, his spear raised and ready. His glowing eyes swept the darkness, searching for movement. He saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then his communicator crackled with a burst of static, followed by a scream that was cut short. Calveth recognized the voice. It belonged to Renshaw, one of the youngest hunters in his patrol. The scream had come from somewhere to the north, perhaps half a kilometer away. He activated his communicator. The channel was filled with static and distant sounds of struggle. Another scream rang out, this one from the south, then another from the east. Calveth felt something he had not experienced in many years: fear. He began to run through the jungle, abandoning stealth for speed. His hunters were dying, picked off one by one in the darkness. But that was impossible. The Na'vi were the greatest hunters in the galaxy. Nothing could prey upon them in the dark. A shape moved in his peripheral vision. Calveth threw himself to the side as something whistled past his head. He rolled and came up with his spear ready, searching for his attacker. A figure stood on a branch above him, barely visible even to his enhanced eyes. It was a human. The creature wore some kind of device over its eyes, a bulky apparatus that covered half its face. In its hands, it held a weapon Calveth did not recognize. The human was completely silent, its breathing controlled and steady. Calveth stared at the creature in disbelief. How could a human see in this darkness? How could it move so silently through the trees? The human raised its weapon and fired. Calveth dove behind a tree as a projectile struck the trunk beside him, spraying bark across his face. He scrambled through the undergrowth, abandoning his spear in his panic. More shots followed him, tracking his movement with impossible accuracy. The hunter had become the hunted. Calveth ran blindly through the jungle, his mind racing. The humans had technology that allowed them to see in darkness. They had adapted to the environment instead of surrendering to it, and they were not helpless prey waiting to be slaughtered. They were predators. He burst into a small clearing and stopped, gasping for breath. His communicator was silent now. All his hunters were gone, taken by creatures that should have been easy prey. A voice spoke from the darkness behind him. Calveth spun around. 5 humans stood at the edge of the clearing, their strange eye devices glowing faintly with green light. They held their weapons with confidence and skill, their bodies positioned for combat. The one who had spoken stepped forward, and Calveth realized it was a female. She removed her eye device, revealing pale eyes that reflected the faint moonlight. She stared at Calveth without fear, without hesitation. In her gaze, he saw something that chilled him to his core. She saw him as prey. The human spoke again, her words translated through a small device on her collar. She told Calveth that her people had been hunted before, many times, by many species who thought humans were weak and helpless. Those species had learned a terrible truth. Humans were not creatures of the light. They were creatures of adaptation. When faced with darkness, they created devices that could pierce it. When faced with predators, they became deadlier predators themselves. They did not accept weakness. They overcame it. Calveth listened to her words with growing understanding. His people had assumed the humans would be easy targets, blind creatures stumbling through unfamiliar darkness. But the humans had prepared for this hunt. They had studied their enemy and found ways to neutralize every advantage. The night vision devices were just the beginning. Their silent movements came from training, years of practice moving through hostile territory. Their weapons were designed for exactly this kind of engagement, accurate and deadly in low-light conditions. The Na'vi had spent generations evolving to hunt in darkness. The humans had achieved the same capability in just a few hours with technology and determination. The female human stepped closer to Calveth. She told him that his hunters were not dead. They had been subdued and restrained, their wounds treated with human medicine. The humans had no desire to kill unless necessary. They had come to Kethra Prime on a research mission, not a military operation. Their ship had malfunctioned and crashed. When the Na'vi began hunting them, they had defended themselves with the minimum force required. Calveth looked at the human with new eyes. His people were proud of their heritage as hunters and warriors. But this small group of humans had defeated an entire patrol of elite Na'vi warriors without killing a single one. That required not just skill, but restraint, discipline, mercy. Perhaps humans were not as primitive as the coalition believed. The female human extended her hand toward Calveth. She offered him a choice. He could continue to see humans as prey and enemies, or he could recognize them as potential allies. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and no species survived alone for long. Calveth hesitated for a long moment. His pride demanded that he reject her offer, that he fight to the death rather than accept help from creatures his people had deemed inferior. But his wisdom told him something different. The humans had demonstrated a capability that the Na'vi could not match. They had taken every advantage the Night Hunters possessed and overcome them with technology, training, and intelligence. This was not a species to dismiss or underestimate. Calveth reached out and clasped the human's hand. In that moment, something shifted in the galaxy. The Na'vi and the humans would face each other not as hunter and prey, but as equals. The night jungle of Kethra Prime fell silent once more. But now the silence was peaceful rather than ominous. Two species that had met as enemies would part as something else entirely. The Na'vi night hunters would remember this patrol for generations. They would tell stories of the creatures from the bright world who had turned the hunt around and shown them a new kind of strength. And they would learn that glowing sharp eyes and natural gifts were not enough. True power came from the ability to adapt, to overcome, and to choose mercy when destruction was possible. The humans gathered their equipment and began the long walk toward their damaged ship. Calveth watched them go, his glowing eyes following their shapes through the darkness. They moved with confidence now, their night vision devices active and scanning. Nothing escaped those glowing artificial eyes. The hunter had found hunters greater than himself.